You know, over the course of recording this video, I kind of realized I have to split it into multiple parts. It does sort of make sense though, this is all one giant meta story. From Trump's war with Twitter over fake news, to the murder of George Floyd, which is what we're talking about today, and to the peaceful protests, the riot, and the overall violent aftermath. We're gonna have to talk about that another day. Today, let's talk about George Floyd. I'm sure we've all seen the video at this point. I probably can't play the full thing because that would likely get me kicked off of YouTube. A Minneapolis police officer knelt on the neck of George Floyd for approximately 8 minutes. During that time, he said, "I can't breathe," repeatedly. He fell unconscious and later died. Meanwhile, bystanders recorded the incident and managed to capture this man's death live on camera. Just from a layman's point of view, it seems to me that if you have to control even a violent person and you have 4 police officers there is probably a much better way to do it than like this. This is absolutely disgusting. This is legitimate police brutality. And whenever some leftist group like Black Lives Matter talks about the brutality of the police, this would be one of those instances where they have a point. Thankfully, at least in this case, justice is actually beginning to be served. Here is the lawsuit filed against the officer, Derek Michael Chauvin. The complainant submits this complaint to the court and states that there is probable cause to believe the defendant committed the following offenses. Count 1, murder of the 3rd degree, maximum sentence 25 years, offense level felony. The charge description, that on or about May 25th, 2020, in Hennepin County, Minnesota, Derek Michael Chauvin caused the death of George Floyd by perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others and inviting a depraved mind without regard for human life. Count 2. Charge, manslaughter, 2nd degree. Maximum sentence, 10 years and or $20,000. Offense level felony. Charge description, that on or about May 25th, 2020 in Hennepin County, Minnesota, Derek Michael Chauvin caused the death of George Floyd by his culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk and taking a chance of causing death or great bodily harm to George Floyd. And of course you have the statement of probable cause, which is basically just the story of what happened. And you know what? Fucking good. Throw the book at this guy. He's a piece of shit. He should be in jail for probably the rest of his life. He absolutely shouldn't be a cop. And I am glad that justice is, at the very least, being played out properly here. But that is the thing about justice. You can't simply jump into it, you know? Officer Derek Chauvin does deserve a legitimate defense, even though he's obviously guilty, at least in my mind, but his rights don't get thrown out the window just because he's a piece of shit. And we get justice by being impassionate and letting the system work. For example, there was widespread condemnation when the county attorney said there was actually evidence in the George Floyd case that does not support a criminal charge.
That video is graphic and horrific and terrible, and no person should do that. But my job in the end is to prove that he violated a criminal statute. And there is other evidence that does not support a criminal charge. We need to wade through all of that evidence and to come through with a meaningful determination, and we are doing that to the best of our ability. We have to do this right. We have to prove it in a court of law. And I will just point to you the comparison to what happened in Billy in Baltimore in the Gray case. It was a rush to charge, it was a rush to justice, and all of those people were found not guilty. I will not rush to justice. I'm going to do this right.
Now that seems completely reasonable to me. But people didn't like this. Oh, how dare you be impartial? How dare you not rush to immediately just chop this guy's head off or something? Well, that's not justice. And as we saw, these people did eventually come to the conclusion to charge the officer with both manslaughter and murder. But this idea that there may be some other bits of evidence that we must consider, that have to be properly looked over before the charge is filed, is not an offensive one to me. And people really shouldn't be up in arms about it. But of course, BuzzFeed was. Why it took 4 days to arrest the officer in George Floyd's killing. It took 4 days to arrest the officer who used a knee chokehold on George Floyd. Delays are built into investigations against cops. Or maybe it's the fact that it actually took an investigation. Like, for example, the autopsy stating that asphyxiation was not the cause of George Floyd's death. George Floyd died Monday from a combination of pre-existing health conditions exacerbated by being held down by Minneapolis officers. not from strangulation or asphyxiation. Preliminary findings from the autopsy found no physical findings that support a diagnosis of traumatic asphyxiation or strangulation. Mr. Floyd had underlying health conditions, including coronary artery disease and hypertensive heart disease. The combined effects of Mr. Floyd being restrained by the police, his underlying health conditions, and any potential intoxicants in his system likely contributed to his death. Now that whole any potential intoxicants in his system line, that's a bit gaslighty in my opinion. Unless you have evidence that he was drunk or high or something, you probably shouldn't be putting that in. But the rest of it actually sounds somewhat credible to me. This idea that he wasn't actually strangled by the officer, but that he was, say, an overweight black man who wasn't in the best of shape, didn't have the best diet, and he had a heart attack during a highly stressful situation while he was being pinned down by officers, that not only sounds realistic, but it also sounds familiar. That is exactly what happened to Eric Garner in 2014, if you recall. The New York police tried to arrest this guy. He was out of shape, obese. They choked him, took him down, and he died. Everyone thought the police were negligent because they had choked him to death, but it turns out he actually had a heart attack during the altercation. Now, I still think that makes the police liable because they induced a heart attack trying to arrest ultimately what was, I think, an innocent man in Eric Garner's case. But outrageously, those New York cops never actually did get charged with anything. Eric Garner, like George Floyd, said, "I can't breathe," while he was dying. He said it 11 times, in fact. The autopsy of Eric Garner concluded that the compression of his neck, compression of his chest, and prone positioning during physical restraint by police, combined with asthma, heart disease, and obesity, were what killed him. And although a grand jury decided not to indict the officer in that case, 5 years later he did eventually get fired due to his actions. And like the Eric Garner case, more information would come out as time went on. This article by CNN is a bit misleading. Why George Floyd was arrested and what happened in the minutes following. Surveillance video shows he was complying with the police. Yeah, that surveillance video they're talking about, it actually shows him struggling with the police, at least initially. When they first pulled him out of his car, he wasn't complying. Then when they sat him down on the side of the road, he was complying. And then when they brought him across the street, the very famous viral video that I showed at the beginning was recorded. Another similarity with Eric Garner's case is that both Eric Garner and George Floyd were presumably guilty of minor offenses, maybe worth being arrested over, but certainly not worth being killed in police custody over. It turns out that George Floyd had tried to use counterfeit $20 bills to buy cigarettes at a Cup Foods convenience store. And, eventually, another video came out showing a different angle of George Floyd's death. There were actually 3 officers on top of him, not just one at the time, with the 4th one standing by and watching. A third angle shows George Floyd struggling with the police inside the back of the police car, and it almost looks like he attempts to open the other back door based on the body language of the police officers, who scramble around to try and stop him. It seems like, had George Floyd not been murdered by these cops, he might have been found guilty for a few things, including resisting arrest, but that still doesn't justify killing him in the street. It's crazy, though. This happened July 17th, 2014, and here we are in 2020, and it's happening again. And I mean to the letter. You have a police officer who is blatantly misbehaving and caught on film. You have the initial public outcry revolving around the idea that the victim is strangled to death. You even have the same sloganeering, "I can't breathe." You have an autopsy that states that he actually didn't strangle to death, but instead he suffered heart failure. That gives the pro-police people just enough wiggle room to say that the cops are all right, and it gives the racial activists just enough wiggle room to absolutely go insane, riot, and burn entire cities down. But we'll talk about that later. And speaking of people on the police's side here, check this guy out. If you say you can't breathe, you're breathing. Mississippi mayor defends officers involved in George Floyd's arrest. Man, if there was ever a poster child of not being able to breathe, it'd be this dude. Holy fuck. This idea here, if you say you can't breathe, you're breathing, is provably wrong. We know this now. If you have air in your lungs and you exhale that air in order to say the words, "I can't breathe," and then you can no longer inhale new air, you still can't breathe. At one point, I had actually found a video of a montage of cops who are off the job or in their cars or something, recording short vlogs about how They think this is terrible, how it's going to ruin their jobs in their cities because they have to rebuild the trust with their communities, how they would never do this kind of thing, how the cops involved were rotten cops, the whole bit. I unfortunately can't find that video montage anymore. It might have been taken down or something, but I do have at least some comments from police officers that we can look at. Research into asphyxiation deaths during physical restraint show that this is actually the most common statement a person makes before dying. I'm a former police officer, and so have had plenty of training in physical restraint of individuals being arrested. There is no police academy training officers to kneel on someone's neck to subdue them. That's how you kill a person. There is extensive training on how to avoid seriously injuring a person while restraining them, and I guarantee you every one of these officers was trained to never strike a person in the neck or choke them. I'm a lieutenant in my hometown police department. I started my day by showing the video to my officers and making sure my people understood that this is murder, plain and simple. You never, outside of a life and death struggle, do anything like this. George Floyd was handcuffed and on the ground. If he was still struggling badly enough that they felt a need to hold him down, there's 100 ways to do it safely. Use of force should always be as measured and considered as possible. There will always be times where an officer sees danger and has to make a split-second decision without the luxury of weighing the consequences. That clearly was not the case here. Retired after 28 years, nothing less than murder. All the guys I worked with would have never considered doing something like that. You treat combative in custodies once they're secured as human beings. Nothing should be personal. Once they've been subdued and you're safe as an officer, you stand him up, pat him down, and understand that your arrestee is at a low point in his life. Give him some dignity and you'll generally get his respect. It works 90% of the time. And speaking of it not being personal, what if it was? George Floyd and the fired police officer overlapped security shifts at a South Minneapolis club. A former club owner in South Minneapolis says the now fired police officer and the black man who died in his custody this week both worked security for her club up to the end of last year. Chauvin was our off-duty police for almost the entirety of the 17 years that we were open. They were working together at the same time. It's just that Chauvin worked outside and security guards worked inside. I mean, who knows? Did these guys know each other? Was there a personal beef between them? In a more general sense, it seems like Derek Chauvin has a history of flying off the handle. Ira Tolles stated that the cop who kneeled on George Floyd tried to kill me back in 2009. Derek Chauvin barged into his home while responding to a domestic violence call and shot him at close range, leaving him with a permanent hole in his stomach. He believes that Floyd's horrific death could have been prevented if Chauvin was properly punished for his violent arrest in May 2008. He said that while he pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge and still suffers pain from the bullet hole in his lower stomach, Chauvin continued his career at the Minneapolis Police Department with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. Oh, and get this! Amy Klobuchar once failed to prosecute Derek Chauvin, the cop in the George Floyd death. Former Democratic presidential candidate and potential vice presidential pick, Amy Klobuchar, failed to get charges brought against the police officer involved in George Floyd's death while serving as a county attorney in 2006, prompting criticism of her law enforcement background. Derek Chauvin, the officer seen on video with a knee in Floyd's neck Monday as Floyd begged for air, was one of 6 officers who fatally shot 42-year-old Wayne Reyes in 2006, after the man brandished a shotgun against the cops, according to a report by Minneapolis watchdog group Communities Against United Police Brutality. Oh no. I know Biden wanted a female VP, but I guess it's not going to be Amy Klobuchar, is it? Police officer Derek Chauvin has been arrested and is in custody for the murder of George Floyd, the first step towards justice. Police officer Derek Chauvin charged with murder and manslaughter in the killing of George Floyd. And there may be subsequent charges. The first step towards justice. Wouldn't that be the second step towards justice, Amy? Amy Klobuchar, knocked out of the running as potential VP due to her behavior while a county attorney. First step towards justice. This flyer has been floating around Minneapolis right now with some interesting claims on it. Who is Derek M. Chauvin? Minneapolis police officer who murdered George Floyd. Seems to be true. The restraint technique used by Chauvin to murder Floyd was not part of the department's training. Based on the various comments that I've seen, and some of them I've shared with you, that also seems to be true. He's represented by Tom Kelly, the same attorney who got Officer Geronimo Yanez, who murdered Philando Castile, acquitted. The Philando Castile case is a tricky one to judge. Philando Castile told the officer that he had a gun. Philando Castile reached close to the gun and refused to move his hand away. The officer told him multiple times to take his hand away from his gun. He reached for something, and the officer, clearly spooked, opened fire. This happened back in 2016. If you'll recall, the shooting was live streamed on Facebook. And yes, ultimately the officer didn't get charged, but he did get fired. Because in the end, the guy was reaching for his gun. He was put on leave in 2011 for an inappropriate police shooting of Alaskan Native American Leroy Martinez. Leroy Martinez drew his gun near a playground. He refused to drop the gun and listen to the officer's commands, so the officers shot him. The police chief at the time said that the officers, including Chauvin, acted appropriately and courageously. He shot Eric Tolles in 2008. That seems to be true, we've already covered it. He was one of the 6 officers who murdered Wayne Reyes. That was the Klobuchar story, and that one's kind of up in the air because Wayne Reyes also had a shotgun pointed at the cops, so who knows. Chauvin and another officer were chasing a car in 2005, causing the death of 3 people, according to Communities United Against Police Brutality. I can't seem to find much about this one. There are 12 police brutality complaints against Chauvin in the Minneapolis Office of Police Conduct Complaint Database. They are all listed as closed, non-public, and no discipline. It seems like the information on this flyer in the end is about 50% accurate. But even if none of this stuff was accurate and the only thing Derek Chauvin did was kill George Floyd in the manner that he did, that still makes him a murderer. All of this stuff is just icing on the cake. I've seen this meme floating around and I actually do think it cuts to the heart of the issue. An Asian cop stands by as a white cop murders a black man. A white female cop murders a black man. A black cop murders a white woman. A Latino cop murders a black man. A white cop murders a white man. If you still think this is a race issue, then you haven't been paying attention. This is not a race issue. The majority of black deaths are caused by other black people, not white people, and certainly not police officers. This is not a race issue. This is a policing issue. And I understand the Blue Lives Matter point of view. I understand that there are a lot of good cops out there who have to go out into bad parts of town and get fucking blown away all the time by thugs and gangbangers who just don't give a shit. They do a hard job and it is often thankless. But you cannot deny that there are dirty cops out there. You can't deny that there are schoolyard bullies who never grew up and decided to become police officers just so they could keep bullying people with impunity. You can't deny that there are sometimes legitimate racists out there that are cops. And you also can't deny that every single good cop who stands up for all the bad cops for the sake of, I don't know, team unity or walking the thin blue line or whatever you guys want to call it, that still makes you a bad cop. If you are a good cop who does everything by the books, but you cover up a bad cop's crimes, that makes you just as bad. And you're dishonoring your badge just as much. And we all know that some cops are just fucking pigs. This is from the protests in Seattle from December 2019. This Seattle Police Department officer trips over his own bike and then uses it as an excuse to violently attack and arrest a protester 10 feet away from him who is moving backwards and obeying orders. Appalling. A U.S. Marine veteran decided to record an officer who was making a different arrest, and he suffered a concussion just for filming the officer from his front porch, from his own private property. You all remember this story, right? 4 dead after armed robbers hijack a UPS truck. The police shot the robbers dead, but they also killed the UPS driver. Like, hey guys, if you're gonna approach the van and try to rescue this guy, do you think you would mind lining up your shots such that civilians don't get hit? Let alone the innocent hostage? Police fire on sleeping man's home, killing him and injuring his girlfriend. Duncan Socrates Lemp was asleep at home in Silver Springs, Maryland, Thursday morning, when police decided to fire on his home with no warning, killing him and injuring his girlfriend. Police were serving a warrant to search Lemp's place of residence, also the home of his 19-year-old brother and parents. The warrant has no issue of imminent threat to any law enforcement officials or the public in general, baffling the family and attorney as despite this, they report the police gave no warning before firing on the property. It turns out this guy did have some illegal guns on him, but he was asleep. Everyone in the building was asleep. There was no activity going on in the building. Suspecting somebody of owning illegal guns is not enough to just open fire on a building, especially if the warrant says there is no imminent threat. In 2016, Charlie Kinsey was shot by an officer while trying to help a man with autism from the assisted living facility where he works. He was lying on the ground face up with no weapons, and he had his hands up. He was yelling, "Don't shoot me," and they shot him anyway.
Watch, just moments before the shooting, you can see 47-year-old Charles Kinsey, his hands raised in the air. The video released overnight by his lawyer. Kinsey in the yellow shirt works at an assisted living facility, and the man at his feet is a 23-year-old with autism who ran away from the group home. Listen as Kinsey talks to police. Kinsey even tries to calm the young man with autism. At some point, one of the officers shoots Kinsey, but he survives and speaks with Fox station WSVN from his hospital bed, recounting what he told that officer.
And I'm telling him again, sir, there's no need for a firearm. I'm unarmed. He's an autistic guy. He had a toy truck in his hand. When he hit me, I'm like, I still got my hands in the air. I said, no, I just got shot. And I'm standing there, I'm like, sir, why did you shoot me? And his words to me, he said, I don't know.
An officer pulled a gun on a student picking up trash outside of his dorm building. The officer claimed he was in the right because he had to confirm whether or not the student had the right to be there. Even though there was no reasonable suspicion of anything, he was simply picking up garbage.
You have a dangerous object in your hand and you're failing to put it down. Put it down. You're being detained.
Your hand is on your weapon and you're gonna shoot me?
Subject's failing to comply, not sitting down, and he has some kind of a blunt object in his hand. I'm just gonna follow until my cover gets here. Sit down. Now.
Why?
Now. Do it now.
Why? Why?
I'm detaining you to investigate.
For
Investigated
what?
trespass.
I live here.
You haven't confirmed that. Sit down.
I'm a student.
Sit down and I'll confirm it.
Anywhere.
Sit down now. Do you know him?
Yeah, he works for us. He's our work study.
Okay, can I talk to her?
He's out here picking up trash.
A North Carolina police officer back in 2018 faces charges after beating, choking, and tasing a suspected jaywalker. This guy jaywalks, and he gets police force used on him. And it's not just local police, it's also the feds. Thousands of migrant children were sexually abused in U.S. custody. Inside the cell where a sick 16-year-old boy died in Border Patrol care. Video shows the Border Patrol held a sick teen in a concrete cell without proper medical attention and did not discover his body until his cellmate alerted guards. Whistleblower says ICE denied health care to migrants. Yes, I know these people are illegal immigrants. Yes, they have to be rounded up, detained, properly processed, and sent back to their countries of origin. But they are still humans. They still have human rights. And you cannot simply brutalize them while they're going through the process. This is not a race issue, it's a police issue. And no, radical leftists, the solution is not to abolish the cops. That's stupid. But there is definitely a culture of police officers covering each other up. Good cops assisting bad cops. Telling little white lies, fudging some numbers. Helping their friends out, they're all part of the same team. And the problem with that is that it gives space for legitimately terrible people who happen to be wearing that badge to abuse citizens and violate their rights with impunity. This has to stop. The police are meant to protect and serve. And I know it's real funny because the police department, in fact, said they are not there to protect and serve, and that was just simply a slogan, not actually their mission statement. I know that the police have to use force sometimes in order to maintain everyone's rights. When one person's rights are violated by another person and justice must be served, state force has to be used on the violator. That is simply the reality of how things work. But part of that process involves the police having the consent of the communities that they are policing. Simply having a gun and a badge is not enough. And if you abuse that gun and that badge, that makes you no better than the thugs who are currently going around burning Minneapolis to the ground. This is fundamentally a policing problem. And the race grifters, for all the faults they have, at least seem to understand this. Somewhat. I'll end this video with Talcum X's take. What I know is this. Had George Floyd not been lynched in broad daylight by the Minneapolis police while he begged for life, while people begged the police to stop, people wouldn't be ransacking Target right now. People have been pushed too far for too long. Period. Now, what does the murder of George Floyd have to do with ransacking Target, Shaun King? It's almost like you want us to conflate peaceful protests with violent looters. But that is something we will have to talk about next time.